He was young, filthy rich, and dangerously brilliant. For 1 year, he built his own Mafia syndicate from the shadows, challenging empires that had ruled the underworld for decades. Then, in one brutal night, everything collapsed. 3 powerful Mafia groups struck at once, leaving him broken, bleeding, and dragged into police custody. 5 years in prison was the sentence. 6 months of house arrest was the deal. But losing power hurt far more than losing freedom. Confined, watched, and stripped of fear, he meets her, a stunning black nurse with sharp boundaries and zero tolerance for his past. He can buy silence, loyalty, even freedom, but he can't buy her respect. And when she looks him dead in the eye and tells him, "You can't make me scream in here, try harder," something in him snaps. What begins as recovery turns into obsession. What begins as care turns into something dangerous. Then he discovers she's already in love with another man on the medical team. Powerless for the first time in his life, he does the unthinkable and sets off a chain of events that shatter lives, expose secrets, and blur the line between redemption and manipulation. Just when love seems possible, the past refuses to stay buried. And the man who lost everything may still lose the one thing he can't control. But the real question is, what secret brought them together, and what happens when the truth finally comes out? Before we continue, take a quick moment to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. That way, you won't miss any new uploads, and you officially become part of exclusive story listening community. Alright, let's dive in. You can't make me scream in here. The words came out flat, professional, exactly as Kendra Williams intended. She didn't look up from the blood pressure cuff wrapped around his arm, didn't acknowledge the way his eyes tracked her movements with an intensity that would have unsettled someone else. But she'd worked trauma units in Chicago before taking this private contract, had seen men try to intimidate her with silence, with rage, with desperation. This was just another variation. "I wasn't trying to," Park Jae-sung said in English so precise it almost sounded artificial. His voice carried the faint rasp of someone who'd spent weeks with a breathing tube down his throat. "I was asking if you could adjust the pillow." Kendra's hand paused for half a second before she continued pumping the bulb. 140/95. Still too high, but better than yesterday. She made a note on the tablet balanced on the edge of his bed, then finally met his gaze. His face was thinner than it had been in the news photos from a year ago, the sharp jawline now almost severe, but the eyes were the same. Dark, calculating, patient in a way that suggested he was used to getting what he wanted eventually. "You've got a call button for that," she said, setting the cuff aside. "That's what the nursing staff is for. The nursing staff is you. I'm the lead on your medical team. There are 3 others who rotate through for basic care." She moved to check the 4-line in his left hand, the one that wasn't cuffed to the bed rail. The restraint was more symbolic than functional at this point. He could barely sit up without assistance, let alone attempt an escape. "One of them can handle your pillows. I prefer you." Kendra straightened, fixing him with the same look she'd perfected over 8 years of nursing. The look that said she'd heard every line, seen every manipulation, and remained spectacularly unimpressed. "Mr. Park, let me be very clear about something. I'm here because I signed a contract to provide medical care during your house arrest. That contract pays extremely well, which is the only reason I'm standing in a penthouse that probably cost more than my entire neighborhood while taking vitals on someone who, until very recently, ran a criminal organization. I will keep you alive. I will monitor your recovery. I will administer your medications and coordinate with your physicians. What I will not do is play into whatever this is." She gestured vaguely between them. "So use your call button like everyone else." She turned toward the door before he could respond, but his voice followed her anyway. "You think I'm trying to seduce you?" Kendra stopped, shoulders tensing despite herself. She should have kept walking. That's what her instincts screamed at her, the same instincts that had kept her safe through nursing school on the South Side, through late shifts at Cook County Hospital, through the casual racism of patients who wanted anyone but her touching them. But something in his tone made her look back. "Aren't you?" Jae-sung's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes that might have been amusement or pain or both. "If I were trying to seduce you, Ms. Williams, you'd know. This is just conversation." We don't need to have conversations. The psychiatrist your team assigned disagrees. Dr. Chen says socialization is critical to my recovery. Dr. Chen met with appropriate support personnel, not with me. Why not you? The question hung in the air between them, deceptively simple. Kendra could have given him a dozen answers. Because you're a patient. Because you're a criminal. Because the last thing I need is to get tangled up with someone who has enemies powerful enough to put him in a coma. Because I saw the crime scene photos they showed us during orientation, the warehouse where 3 rival syndicates cornered you, and I saw what they did to the 6 men who were with you. Instead, she said, because I'm here to do a job and you're preventing me from doing it. Your physical therapy session starts in 20 minutes. I need to review your mobility progress with Dr. Okafor before then. She left before he could respond, pulling the door shut behind her with more force than necessary. The penthouse hallway was wide enough to feel like a room itself, all marble floors and recessed lighting and abstract art that probably cost more than her student loans. 2 security guards flanked the elevator at the far end, both armed despite the monitoring anklet locked around Jae-sung's leg. The terms of his house arrest required round-the-clock surveillance, medical supervision, and enough security personnel to constitute a small militia. Kendra had read the case files. She knew what kind of operation he'd tried to build in less than a year, how close he'd come to actually succeeding. Warehousing, shipping logistics, cryptocurrency exchanges, all legitimate on the surface, all perfect covers for moving products the law didn't want moved. He'd been brilliant and reckless in equal measure, too young and too confident to recognize that the established powers wouldn't tolerate a newcomer disrupting their territories. The coordinated attack that nearly killed him had been a message. His survival had been luck and the intervention of federal agents who wanted him alive to testify. The deal his lawyers brokered had been the kind only immense wealth could buy. How's our patient today? Kendra turned to find Dr. Liam Willis emerging from the study that had been converted into a medical office. He carried 2 coffee cups, offering her one with the easy smile that had first caught her attention 3 months ago when they'd met at the initial team briefing. Liam was everything Jae-sung wasn't: open, uncomplicated, genuinely kind. A trauma surgeon who'd left hospital work for private contracts because he wanted more control over his hours, more time to actually know his patients. Stable, Kendra said, accepting the coffee gratefully. Blood pressure's still elevated, but trending down. He's gaining strength faster than I expected. That's good news. Liam fell into step beside her as they walked toward the office. Though you don't look happy about it. I'll be happier when this contract ends and I can go back to treating normal people. Normal people who can't afford to pay you 3 times your hospital salary for 6 months of work? Kendra shot him a look, but there was no judgment in his expression, only understanding. Liam knew why she'd taken this job. They'd talked about it over dinner 2 weeks ago. During what might have been their 3rd or 4th date, she'd lost count, too busy enjoying the simple pleasure of being with someone who didn't carry the weight of violence and consequences wherever he went. The money's not worth it if I end up on a rival gang's hit list, she said. That's not going to happen. His deal included protection arrangements for all medical staff. We're explicitly off limits. On paper. In theory. Kendra set her coffee down on the desk harder than she meant to. Do you know what he asked me today? If I could adjust his pillow. Like he doesn't have a call button. Like he doesn't have 3 other nurses specifically assigned to handle basic care tasks. Liam was quiet for a moment, his expression shifting into something more serious. He's testing boundaries. I know that. I've dealt with difficult patients before. This is different. Kendra, the man spent a year building a criminal empire through psychological manipulation and strategic intimidation. He's not going to stop using those skills just because he's in house arrest. Which is exactly why I'm keeping my distance. She pulled up Jae-sung's chart on the computer, scanning through the previous night's vitals. Can you run the PT session today? I need to prep for the psychiatry consult tomorrow. I thought you were handling physical therapy. I was. I'm reassigning it to you. Liam studied her face for a long moment, and Kendra could feel the question he wasn't asking. Are you afraid of him? The answer was complicated, layered. She wasn't afraid of physical violence. Jae-sung could barely stand without assistance right now. But there was something else, something in the way he watched her, patient and certain, that made her deeply uncomfortable. Like he saw through every professional boundary she erected, understood exactly why she needed them. "Okay," Liam said finally. "I'll take PT. But Kendra, if he's making you uncomfortable, we need to document it. This contract has clauses. He's not making me uncomfortable. He's just persistent." Persistent how? Before she could answer, her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, one of the day shift nurses, patient requesting Ms. Williams specifically for medication administration. Kendra closed her eyes briefly. Persistent like that. She found Jae-sung exactly where she'd left him, propped against pillows that someone had already adjusted, gaze fixed on the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Lake Michigan. From 40 stories up, the city looked clean and manageable, all geometric precision and afternoon light. Nothing like the reality she knew existed at street level. "Marcus can handle your medication," Kendra said without preamble. "I'm aware." Jae-sung didn't look away from the window. "But since you're here, maybe you can explain why my pain medication dosage was reduced without consultation." "Dr. Chin reduced it because your pain scores have been declining and we're trying to avoid dependency." "My pain scores have been declining because I've been lying about them." That made her pause. "Why would you do that?" "Because opioids make me stupid, and I can't afford to be stupid right now." He finally turned to look at her, and the exhaustion in his face was so stark it almost looked like honesty. "I need my mind clear." "For what?" "You're not running anything anymore." That was the deal. The deal was cooperation. It didn't eliminate the consequences of what I built. His hand moved unconsciously to his side, where Kendra knew a network of surgical scars traced the path of internal injuries that should have killed him. "There are people who want confirmation I'm no longer a threat. Others who want to know what I told the investigators. Some who just want me dead on principle. The security team can't stop someone determined enough. You know that." His eyes held hers, and for the first time since this contract started, Kendra saw something besides calculation in them. Fear, carefully controlled but unmistakably present. "I'm not trying to manipulate you, Ms. Williams. I'm trying to survive long enough to become someone different. And yes, that includes staying mentally sharp despite considerable pain. So when I ask for you specifically, it's not seduction. It's just that you're the only person on this team who looks at me like I'm already dead, and somehow that's the most honest interaction I have all day." The silence that followed felt heavier than it should, weighted with implications Kendra didn't want to examine. She'd spent years training herself not to sympathize with certain patients, the ones whose injuries were self-inflicted through choices they'd made. Drunk drivers, gang members, people who hurt others and ended up hurt themselves. But something about the way Jae-sung said it, "You're the only person who looks at me like I'm already dead," made her chest tighten with an empathy she absolutely did not want to feel. "The medication reduction stands," she said, keeping her voice level. "But I'll note your pain scores are self-reported and potentially inaccurate. Dr. Chin can adjust the protocol if needed." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I'm just doing my job." "That's what I'm thanking you for. The fact that you're actually doing it instead of just collecting a paycheck." Kendra turned toward the door, then stopped despite every instinct telling her to keep walking. "Mr. Park, I need you to understand something. I don't look at you like you're already dead. I look at you like you're someone who made choices that got people killed, and now you want absolution from the people trying to keep you alive. That's not my job. My job is blood pressure and wound care and making sure you don't develop complications from 3 months in a hospital bed. Whatever else you need, find it somewhere else." She left before he could respond, before she could see whether her words landed as the firm boundary she intended or as something else entirely. In the medical office, Liam was reviewing physical therapy protocols, and Kendra buried herself in paperwork for the rest of the shift, determined not to think about dark eyes watching her with impatience that suggested he had all the time in the world to wait for her defenses to crack. That evening, after her shift ended and she'd changed out of scrubs into jeans and a sweater that actually fit her properly, Liam walked her to her car in the building's underground garage. The security was tight enough that she didn't really need an escort, but she appreciated the gesture anyway. Appreciated the normalcy of it, The simple human kindness that didn't come with layers of ulterior motive. Dinner tomorrow night? Liam asked as they reached her aging Honda. There's a Thai place in Andersonville I've been wanting to try. Can't. I'm covering the overnight shift. Marcus has a family emergency. The night after? Kendra smiled despite the exhaustion pulling at her. Yeah, that works. Liam kissed her goodbye, nothing dramatic or possessive, just a gentle press of lips that tasted like the peppermint gum he constantly chewed. Easy. Uncomplicated. Everything she'd wanted when she'd finally decided to say yes to his persistent but respectful interest. Driving home through early evening traffic, Kendra tried not to think about the contrast. Tried not to compare Liam's straightforward affection to the weight of Jae-sung's attention. But her mind kept circling back to that moment in the penthouse, the exhaustion in his face when he admitted to lying about his pain scores, the fear he'd let slip through his carefully maintained control. You're the only person who looks at me like I'm already dead. She'd meant it as an insult, a way to establish distance. But he'd taken it as honesty, had thanked her for it. What kind of person was grateful to be seen as beyond saving? Her apartment in Bronzeville was small but hers, paid for with 3 jobs and enough determination to outlast every obstacle Chicago had thrown at her. She'd grown up in Englewood, watched her mother work herself to death trying to keep 2 kids fed and housed, learned early that the only person who'd save her was herself. Nursing school had been her ticket out, and she'd ridden it as far as it would take her. This contract was supposed to be the final step. 6 months of high-pay work, enough to clear her student loans and start building actual savings. Maybe even enough to think about buying a place instead of renting. She'd known the job would be difficult, had prepared herself for the ethical complications of treating someone who'd hurt people. What she hadn't prepared for was the way his attention made her skin prickle with awareness she didn't want. The way his voice, rough with disuse and pain, somehow got under her professional armor. The way he seemed to see through every defense she erected, not with cruelty but with recognition, like he understood exactly how hard she worked to keep the world at arm's length because he did the same thing. Kendra made dinner, leftover jollof rice her aunt had dropped off last weekend, and tried to lose herself in a Netflix show that required no emotional investment. But her mind kept drifting back to the penthouse, to the moment when Jae-sung had looked at her with something approaching vulnerability, and she'd responded with calculated coldness. I look at you like you're someone who made choices that got people killed. True. Necessary. The right response to establish boundaries. So why did it feel like she'd kicked someone who was already down? Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend, Trinity. Asterisk, how's the mob boss? Still hot and morally bankrupt. Asterisk. Kendra snorted, typing back. Asterisk, still a patient. Still not my problem beyond keeping him alive. Asterisk. Asterisk, right. Because you're super good at not getting emotionally involved with difficult cases. Asterisk. That was one time, and he was 8 years old with leukemia. You visited him every day for 6 months after he was discharged. Asterisk, he needed stability. His parents were going through a divorce. Asterisk. Asterisk, my point exactly. You're a fixer, Ken. And this guy sounds like a project even you can't handle. Asterisk. Kendra stared at her phone, Trinity's words hitting closer than she wanted to admit. She did have a tendency to get over-involved, to see every patient as a person who needed more than just medical care. It had made her a great nurse and a terrible girlfriend, at least until Liam. He understood the demands of medical work, didn't expect her to be constantly available, gave her space to be who she needed to be. I'm not trying to fix him, she typed. I'm trying to keep my distance. How's that working out? Ask me in 5 months. She went to bed early, knowing the overnight shift would be brutal, but sleep didn't come easily. Instead, she lay in the darkness of her bedroom, listening to the sounds of the city outside her window, and tried not to think about a man 40 stories above Lake Michigan who looked at her like she was the only honest thing in his life. The overnight shift started at 11 p.m., quiet hours when the penthouse took on a different character. The day security team rotated out, replaced by night guards who moved through the space like shadows. Kendra did her rounds, vitals every 4 hours, medication administration, wound checks, moving through the routine with practiced efficiency. Jae-sung was awake when she entered his room at 2 a.m., which wasn't unusual. Insomnia was one of his major issues, a combination of pain, anxiety, and what Dr. Chin carefully termed hypervigilance resulting from sustained trauma. He stared at the ceiling with the blank expression of someone who'd given up trying to force sleep. "Vitals," Kendra said quietly, and he offered his arm without protest. The blood pressure cuff inflated with its familiar hiss. 138/92. Still high. She made a note, then checked his pulse, 85 beats per minute, slightly elevated. When she pressed her fingers to his wrist, she could feel the tension in his muscles, the way his body stayed coiled even in rest. "You should ask Dr. Chin about adjusting your sleep medication," she said. "Doesn't work." "The medication doesn't work, or you're not taking it?" His mouth curved slightly. "Both." Kendra set the blood pressure cuff aside and pulled up a chair, which surprised them both. This wasn't part of her protocol. She should take the vitals and leave, move on to chart documentation and the 100 other tasks that filled overnight shifts. But something about the raw exhaustion in his face made her pause. "Why aren't you taking the sleep medication?" "Same reason I lied about the pain. Can't afford to be unconscious for 8 hours. You're in a secure building with armed guards and surveillance on every floor. Who exactly are you afraid of?" Jae-sung was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Then, everyone." "No one. Myself." He finally looked at her, and in the dim light of the room, his face looked younger, more uncertain. "You ever feel like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop? Like any minute, everything you've built is going to collapse." "Every day of my life until I was about 25, Kendra said before she could stop herself. Then I realized the only way to stop waiting was to build something that couldn't be taken away. And what was that? My education. My skills. Myself." She leaned back in the chair, aware she was crossing a line but unable to stop. "You can take away my job, my apartment, everything I own. But you can't take away the fact that I'm a damn good nurse who knows how to keep people alive. That why you're so angry I almost died?" The question caught her off guard, sharp and too perceptive. "I'm not angry. You are. Every time you look at me, there's this fury just under the surface. At first I thought it was judgment, and maybe some of it is. But mostly I think you're angry that I wasted something you worked so hard to build in other people." Kendra stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I need to check your surgical sites." "You already did, during evening rounds. Dr. Chin wants twice nightly checks while you're experiencing sleep disruption." It was a lie and they both knew it, but Jae-sung didn't call her on it. He simply pulled up his shirt, exposing the roadmap of scars across his torso. Kendra had seen them dozens of times, had monitored their healing with professional detachment. Knife wounds, mostly, plus the exit site from a bullet that had somehow missed everything vital. The surgeons who'd put him back together had called it miraculous. Kendra called it statistics. Somebody had to be the outlier. But tonight, in the quiet of the overnight shift with her own exhaustion lowering her defenses, she looked at those scars and saw what they represented. Not survival, but violence. A body that had been torn apart by people who wanted him dead, stitched back together by doctors who'd probably had moral qualms about saving him, and now monitored by a nurse who couldn't decide if his survival was justice or just prolonged punishment. "They don't hurt as much as they used to," Jae-sung said quietly, watching her face. "In case you were wondering, I wasn't. You were. You get this expression sometimes, like you're trying to calculate exactly how much pain I'm in and whether I deserve it." Kendra's hands stilled on his skin, right over a scar that curved around his ribs. "And what's the answer? To which question? Do you deserve it?" His dark eyes held hers, unflinching. "Probably more than this. But I'm grateful it wasn't less." She pulled his shirt down and stepped back, putting necessary distance between them. "The sites look clean. No signs of infection or inflammation. I'll note it in your chart." "Ms. Williams. Get some rest, Mr. Park. Or at least try." She left before he could say whatever he'd been about to say, before her traitorous empathy could convince her to stay and have a conversation that would only complicate things further. In the medical office, she updated his chart with hands that shook slightly from adrenaline or fear or something else she didn't want to name. The rest of the overnight shift passed in mechanical routine. Vitals at 4 a.m., blood pressure slightly lower, pulse still elevated. Medication administration at 6. By the time the day shift arrived and Kendra handed off to Marcus, she'd convinced herself that the moment in Jae-sung's room had been nothing more than exhaustion lowering her professional boundaries. It wouldn't happen again. But it did happen again. And again. Over the following 2 weeks, Kendra found herself drawn into conversations she hadn't intended to have, staying longer than necessary during routine checks, asking questions that went beyond medical assessment. She learned that he'd grown up in Seoul until age 12, when his family moved to Chicago for his father's business. That he'd excelled at everything, academics, music, sports, until he decided none of it mattered and built his own path. That his parents had disowned him when the arrests started, cutting him off completely in an attempt to preserve their own reputations. I don't blame them, Jae-sung said during one late-night conversation when sleep medication had finally made him drowsy enough to be honest. I destroyed everything they built. Their reputation in the Korean community here, their business relationships, their standing. What kind of son does that? The kind who wanted something different and didn't know how to ask for it, Kendra heard herself say. Then, realizing she'd gone too far, that's not therapy. Dr. Chin handles that. Dr. Chin asks about my childhood and my relationship with authority figures. You actually listen. I'm paid to monitor your recovery. Then why do you come in here on your nights off? Kendra froze, caught. She had been doing that, hadn't she? Picking up extra shifts, volunteering for overnight coverage even when it wasn't her rotation. Telling herself it was about the money, about maximizing her contract earnings, but knowing in the hollow place behind her ribs that it was something else entirely. I need to check your foreline, she said, deflecting. But Jae-sung's hand caught her wrist as she reached for the tubing, his grip light but deliberate. Ms. Williams. Kendra. Why are you here? She should have pulled away. Should have restated her boundaries, reminded him that patient contact outside necessary medical care was inappropriate. Instead, she looked down at his hand on her wrist, the first time he'd touched her beyond the necessary contact of medical procedures, and felt her carefully constructed defenses crack just slightly. I don't know, she admitted quietly. He released her wrist immediately, as if realizing he'd crossed a line. I'm sorry. That was inappropriate. Yes, it was. I won't do it again. Kendra stepped back, putting proper distance between them, but something in her chest ached with a loss she hadn't anticipated. I think we need to establish clearer boundaries. I'll ask Dr. Okafor to take over as your primary nurse. Don't. The word came out sharp, almost desperate. Then, softer, please. I'll maintain appropriate boundaries. You're the only person who treats me like I'm human instead of a case file or a threat assessment or a moral failing. You are all of those things. I know. But with you, sometimes I feel like I might be something else too. Something worth saving. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Kendra couldn't afford to examine. She thought about Liam, about their easy dinners and uncomplicated affection. About the life she was building that didn't involve criminals and moral compromise and patients who looked at her like she was the only solid thing in their collapsing world. I'll stay on as your primary nurse, she said finally. But Mr. Park, you need to understand something. Whatever you think is happening here, whatever connection you think we have, it's transference. You're isolated and vulnerable, and I'm one of the few people who interacts with you regularly. That's not a foundation for anything real. I know what transference is. This isn't that. Then what is it? He met her eyes with an honesty that made her breath catch. I don't know yet. But I'd like the chance to find out. Kendra left without responding, her heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the physical exertion of overnight nursing. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and tried to remember all the reasons this was wrong. He was a patient. He was a criminal. He was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with physical violence and everything to do with how he made her question things she'd been certain about. Her phone buzzed with a text from Liam. *, morning, beautiful. Dinner tonight? I'm thinking that Italian place in Little Italy, *. She stared at the message, at the casual endearment that should have made her smile. Instead, she felt the weight of guilt, heavy and deserved. She hadn't done anything wrong, hadn't crossed any lines. But she'd wanted to, and somehow that felt like betrayal anyway. Can't tonight, she typed back. Asterisk, picking up an extra shift. Rain check, asterisk. The lie came too easily. 3 days later, Kendra arrived for her regular shift to find the penthouse transformed. Physical therapy equipment had been moved into the main living area, creating an improvised rehabilitation gym. Jae-sung was on his feet, actually standing without assistance, working through a series of balance exercises under Dr. Okafor's supervision. Sweat dampened his hair and his face was tight with concentration, but he was doing it. Moving. Recovering. Remarkable progress, Dr. Okafor said when Kendra joined them. He's advanced 2 weeks ahead of the projected timeline. Kendra watched Jae-sung complete a weight-bearing exercise that should have been beyond his capability. What's motivating you? Same thing that always motivates me. The next goal. And what's that? Being able to walk out of here on my own when the house arrest ends. Not in a wheelchair or with a walker. On my own feet. There was something in his voice that made Kendra study his face more carefully. Pride, certainly. Determination. But underneath that, something else. Fear. He was terrified of being vulnerable, of needing help, of being anything less than completely self-sufficient. She understood that fear intimately. Had felt it every time she'd needed to ask for help in nursing school, every time she'd been forced to admit she couldn't do something alone. The desperate need to prove you were strong enough, capable enough, worthy enough to exist in a world that wanted to dismiss you. Careful, she said quietly. Push too hard and you'll set yourself back. I'm fine. Your blood pressure says otherwise. You're at 145/98 right now, aren't you? Jae-sung's jaw tightened, which was answer enough. Dr. Okafor immediately moved to take a reading, confirming Kendra's assessment. They ended the PT session early over Jae-sung's protests, getting him back to bed despite his insistence that he could do more. You're going to hurt yourself, Kendra said when they were alone, her frustration finally breaking through professional calm. Is that what you want? To end up back in the hospital because you couldn't admit you have limits. I don't have limits. I have obstacles. There's a difference. No, there isn't. You're human. You're recovering from massive trauma. Your body needs time to heal and you're not giving it that time because you're terrified of appearing weak. I'm not terrified. Yes, you are. The words burst out of her before she could stop them. You're so afraid of being vulnerable that you're willing to hurt yourself to avoid it. And I can't watch that. I won't watch you destroy the progress you've made just because you can't accept that needing help doesn't make you less. Silence crashed down between them, thick with things neither of them could say. Jae-sung stared at her with an expression she couldn't read, something between anger and recognition, and something else that made her chest tighten. You sound like you know what that feels like, he said finally. I do. And I know what it costs to learn that lesson the hard way. What did it cost you? Kendra turned away, suddenly aware she'd revealed far more than she intended. It doesn't matter. What matters is you following the recovery protocol. It matters to me. It shouldn't. I'm your nurse, not your friend. What if I want you to be both? The question landed like a physical blow, knocking the breath from her lungs. Kendra gripped the edge of the bed rail, searching for the professional distance that had always been her armor, and finding it suddenly, terrifyingly absent. You can't have both, she said, hating how her voice shook. I can't be both. Why not? Because. She spun to face him, all her careful control fracturing. Because I'm with Liam. Because you're a patient. Because this, she gestured between them, at the space that somehow felt charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. This isn't real. It's circumstance and proximity and your brain trying to form attachments because you're isolated. That's all it is. You keep telling yourself that. Does it help? Yes. You're lying. Kendra's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Stop it. Stop what? Seeing you? You're the one who keeps coming back, who picks up extra shifts, who stays longer than necessary to have conversations that have nothing to do with medical care. If this isn't real, why can't you stay away? Because he was right. Because despite every logical reason to maintain distance, She kept finding excuses to be in his presence. Because somewhere in the past month, Park Jae-sung had stopped being just a patient and become something else, something that terrified her. "I'm reassigning your care to Dr. Okafor effective immediately," she said, pulling out her phone. "This situation has become inappropriate, and I'm removing myself from it." She started toward the door, but his voice stopped her. Not loud, not pleading. Just quiet and certain, "You'll be back." Kendra didn't respond. Didn't trust herself to speak without saying something she couldn't take back. She walked out of his room, out of the medical office, into the elevator, and down to the parking garage where her car waited. Only when she was alone in the driver's seat, hands shaking on the steering wheel, did she allow herself to acknowledge the truth. He was right. She would be back. Because somewhere between professional obligation and personal boundaries, between his calculated manipulations and her careful defenses, something had shifted. Something that had nothing to do with transference or proximity or any of the rational explanations she'd given herself. She cared about him. Not as a patient, not as a professional obligation, but as a person. And that realization was the most dangerous thing she'd felt in years. Kendra lasted 3 days. 3 days of throwing herself into other work, picking up shifts at the community clinic where she volunteered, spending every available hour with Liam trying to convince herself that this was what she wanted. Simple. Safe. A relationship with a good man who didn't carry the weight of violence and consequence everywhere he went. But the texts kept coming. Not from Jae-sung, he maintained the boundaries she demanded, but from Marcus, from Dr. Okafor, from the case coordinator. Patient refusing physical therapy. Patient's blood pressure elevated. Patient's sleep disruption worsening. Patient specifically requesting Ms. Williams' return to care team. On the 4th day, Kendra found herself standing outside the penthouse at 6 in the morning, telling herself she was only here to assess the situation professionally. That she'd review his status, provide recommendations to Dr. Okafor, and leave. Nothing more. The security guard at the elevator recognized her, waving her through without question. The penthouse was quiet in the early morning, just the soft hum of climate control and the distant sound of the city waking up 40 stories below. Kendra moved through the space on autopilot, muscle memory carrying her to the medical office, where she pulled up Jae-sung's chart. The numbers told a story her professional eye read immediately. Blood pressure climbing steadily over 3 days. Sleep medication untaken despite Dr. Chen's explicit orders. Physical therapy sessions abbreviated due to patient noncompliance. He was regressing, deliberately self-destructing, and everyone on the team knew exactly why. "God damn it," Kendra muttered, closing the laptop harder than necessary. She found him in his room, awake despite the early hour, staring at the ceiling with the blank expression she recognized as his version of surrender. He didn't acknowledge her entrance, didn't even turn his head. Just kept staring at nothing. "Your blood pressure is going to put you back in the hospital," Kendra said without preamble. "Is that what you want?" Silence. "Mr. Park, I'm talking to you." "I heard you. I don't have an answer you want to hear." Kendra moved closer, her professional assessment warring with personal frustration. His face looked thinner, the shadows under his eyes more pronounced. 3 days. He'd managed to undo weeks of progress in 3 days. "Why aren't you taking your medication?" "Don't need it." "You clearly do need it. You're not sleeping, your blood pressure is through the roof, and according to Dr. Okafor you nearly collapsed during yesterday's PT session." "I'm fine." "You're not fine." The words came out sharper than she intended. "You're punishing yourself because I set boundaries. That's manipulative and childish, and I won't participate in it." Finally, he looked at her. His eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion, but still sharp, still seeing too much. "You think this is about you? Isn't it?" "No." He pushed himself up to sitting with visible effort. "This is about me realizing that the only person in this whole arrangement who treated me like something other than a problem to be managed was the one person who had every reason not to. And now she's gone because I couldn't maintain the pretense that this was just professional obligation. It is just professional obligation. Keep telling yourself that, Ms. Williams. But we both know you didn't come back here at 6 in the morning because of professional obligation." Kendra opened her mouth to argue, to reassert the boundaries that felt increasingly flimsy. But the words wouldn't come. Because he was right. Again. She'd come back because the thought of him deliberately harming himself through noncompliance had kept her awake for 3 nights. Because even when she was with Liam, laughing at his stories and enjoying his uncomplicated affection, part of her mind was here, in this penthouse, wondering if Jae-sung was taking his medication or just staring at the ceiling in the dark. "I came back to make sure you're following your treatment protocol," she said finally, the lie sounding hollow even to her own ears. "Thank you for the professional assessment. You can leave now." The dismissal stung more than it should have. Kendra stood there, frozen between the door and the bed, caught in the terrible space between what she should do and what she wanted to do. The smart choice was to turn around, walk out, let Dr. Okafor handle this case, and move on with her life. The safe choice was to go back to Liam, to the future they were carefully building together, to a relationship that didn't require her to question everything she believed about right and wrong. But she'd never been good at making the safe choice. "I'll stay on as your primary nurse," she heard herself say. "Under conditions." Jae-sung's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Hope, maybe, or relief. "I'm listening. You follow every protocol. Medication, physical therapy, psychiatric sessions, all of it. No more self-destructive behavior. No more manipulation. And we maintain professional boundaries at all times." She paused, then added, "If you can't agree to those terms, I walk out right now and don't come back." "I agree." Just like that. Just like that. He held her gaze, unflinching. "I don't want to hurt myself, Kendra. I want to get better. I just needed to know that getting better mattered to someone other than the lawyer's calculating liability." The use of her first name landed like a physical touch, intimate and presumptuous. She should correct him, re-establish the formal distance. Instead, she heard herself say, "It matters. Your recovery matters. Because I'm a patient." Yes, just a patient. The question hung between them, and Kendra knew that her answer would set the tone for everything that followed. She could lie, could hide behind professional ethics and claim that he meant nothing more to her than any other person in her care. But something about the raw vulnerability in his face made dishonesty feel like cruelty. "No," she said quietly. "Not just a patient. But that's all you can be right now." Jae-sung absorbed this with a small nod, as if she'd confirmed something he already knew. "Okay, then that's what I'll be." Over the following weeks, he kept his word. Took every medication on schedule. Pushed through physical therapy without complaint. Attended every psychiatric session with Dr. Chin. Kendra watched his progress with professional satisfaction and personal unease, because the better he got, the more the boundaries between them felt arbitrary. He was changing. Not just physically, though the daily PT sessions were rebuilding muscle and coordination. Something deeper was shifting, something in the way he talked about his past and his future. During one of Dr. Chen's sessions that Kendra happened to overhear, the penthouse walls weren't as soundproof as they should be. He admitted that building the criminal organization had been less about ambition and more about proving something to parents who'd never seen him as enough. "I wanted them to be afraid of me," he said, his voice barely audible through the closed door. "Because they'd never been proud of me. Fear felt like the next best thing." Kendra stood in the hallway, medical supplies forgotten in her hands, and felt something crack open in her chest. She understood that logic. Had felt that same desperate need for validation, for recognition, even if it came in the form of fear or resentment. Her own mother had been so exhausted by survival that pride became a luxury neither of them could afford. Success in nursing school hadn't made her proud, it had made her worried that Kendra was reaching too far, risking too much, setting herself up for a fall. The first time Kendra brought her mother to see her name on the unit board as a registered nurse, the first words out of her mouth had been, "They're going to expect more from you now. Make sure you don't disappoint them." Not congratulations. Not pride. Just the weight of expectations and the certainty of eventual failure. That night, during her rounds, Kendra found herself sitting in the chair beside Jae-sung's bed instead of conducting a quick vitals check and leaving. He was awake as usual, reading something on a tablet that the court order allowed for approved educational content. Question, she said without preamble. He set the tablet aside. Answer. Do you actually want to change, or do you just want to survive the next 5 months? The directness of it seemed to surprise him. He was quiet for a long moment, and Kendra watched emotions flicker across his face, consideration, uncertainty, something that might have been fear. Both, he said finally. I want to survive because I'm afraid of dying. But I want to change because I'm more afraid of staying who I am. Why? Because who I am got 6 men killed. Who I am built something that hurt people I've never even met. Who I am looks in the mirror and sees someone his own parents couldn't love. He met her eyes, and the honesty in them was almost painful. I don't know if I can become someone different. But I have to try, because being this person for the rest of my life feels like a death sentence anyway. Kendra thought about all the textbook responses Dr. Chen would give. Therapeutic frameworks for behavioral change. Cognitive restructuring. Trauma-informed care. But what came out of her mouth was something else entirely. My mother worked 3 jobs to keep us housed and fed. Cleaning offices at night, retail during the day, whatever she could find. She was so tired, all the time, that I learned to be quiet. To not need things. To take care of myself so she had one less burden. Kendra's hands twisted in her lap. When I got into nursing school, I thought she'd be happy. Proud. Instead, she asked me how I planned to pay for it, who I thought I was to reach for something so far above our station. Like wanting more was a betrayal of everything she'd sacrificed. Did you go anyway? I went anyway. Worked full-time, took loans I'm still paying off, studied every free minute. And when I graduated, when I passed my boards, I called her to share the news. You know what she said? Jae-sung shook his head. She said, good. Now you can help pay off the house. Kendra laughed, but it came out bitter. Not congratulations. Not pride. Just the expectation that my success existed to serve her needs. And I was so angry. Furious. But also relieved, because anger was easier than admitting how much I needed her approval. Did you ever get it? She died 2 years ago. Heart attack in the middle of a shift at the office building she cleaned. Never got to retire, never got to rest, never got to be anything other than exhausted. Kendra wiped at her eyes, surprised to find them wet. I don't know if she was proud of me. I'll never know. And that's something I have to live with. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. Jae-sung didn't offer platitudes or empty comfort, just sat with her in the weight of it. After a while, he said, I think she was proud. She just didn't know how to say it. Maybe. Or maybe she was too tired to feel anything but survival. Kendra stood, needing to move, to create distance from the vulnerability she'd just exposed. I should finish rounds. Kendra. She stopped at the sound of her name, spoken with a gentleness she wasn't prepared for. Thank you for telling me that. I don't know why I did. I do. Because you understand what it's like to want approval from someone who can't give it. And you wanted me to know I'm not alone in that. He was right. Again. It was becoming a pattern, the way he saw through her carefully constructed defenses to the truth underneath. Kendra nodded once, not trusting her voice, and left before she could say anything else that would complicate things further. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and tried to remember all the reasons this was dangerous. But the only thing she could think about was the way he'd said her name. Not Ms. Williams, not nurse, just Kendra. Like she was a person, not a position. Like her vulnerability mattered. Her phone buzzed with a text from Liam. *, miss you. When can I see you? *. Guilt crashed over her, sharp and deserved. She was in the hallway outside another man's room, emotionally raw from sharing things she'd never told Liam, and she couldn't remember the last time she'd thought about him without prompting. Tomorrow, she typed back. I can do dinner after my shift. *, perfect. I'll pick you up at 7, *. The dinner was pleasant, the kind of uncomplicated evening Kendra should have treasured. Liam talked about a successful surgery, asked about her day, made her laugh with impressions of the head administrator, who everyone secretly hated. They held hands across the table, kissed goodbye in the parking lot, made plans for the following week. But as Kendra drove home, All she could think about was the way Jae-sung's eyes had looked when she'd shared her story about her mother. The recognition there, the understanding. Liam was kind and good and everything she should want. So why did being with him feel increasingly like performance? The answer came 3 nights later, during an overnight shift when Kendra found Jae-sung awake at 2 a.m. with his face tight with pain he was trying to hide. His vitals were elevated, heart rate at 95, blood pressure 142/96, and when she pressed gently on his side, he couldn't quite suppress a wince. Pain scale, she asked. 4. Real pain scale. 7. Kendra pulled up his medication record. He was due for pain relief 2 hours ago but hadn't called for it. Why didn't you take your medication? Didn't want to bother anyone. That's what the call button is for. That's literally why it exists. She prepared the dosage, anger and concern warring in her chest. Mr. Park, you can't. Jae-sung. She looked up from the medication. What? My name. It's Jae-sung. And you're Kendra. Can we please just use names? All this professional distance is exhausting. The professional distance is necessary. Is it? Because it seems like we're well past that point. He accepted the medication she offered, swallowing it with water from the cup on his bedside table. You've told me about your mother. I've told you about my parents. We've had conversations that have nothing to do with medical care. So why are we still pretending? Because crossing that line makes everything complicated. Everything's already complicated. At least if we're honest about it, we know where we stand. Kendra sat in the chair beside his bed, exhaustion lowering her defenses. Where do we stand? I don't know. But I know that you're the first person I think about when I wake up, and the last person I think about before I try to sleep. I know that your approval matters more to me than the court's verdict or my parents' judgment or anything else. I know that when you walk into a room, I breathe easier. He paused, then added quietly, and I know you're with someone else, and that I have no right to feel any of this. But I do. The honesty of it stole Kendra's breath. She should shut this down immediately, should reassert boundaries and remind him that this was transference, that his feelings weren't real. But the words wouldn't come because somewhere in the past 2 months, her own feelings had shifted into something she didn't want to name. I can't do this, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't be what you need. What if you already are? Stop. I will if you tell me you feel nothing. Look me in the eye and tell me this is just professional obligation, that I'm just another patient, that you don't feel this too. Kendra met his gaze, prepared to lie. But his eyes held such raw vulnerability that dishonesty felt impossible. What I feel doesn't matter. I'm with Liam. Are you happy? The question landed like a blade between her ribs. That's not fair. I know. But I'm asking anyway. Are you happy? Kendra stood abruptly. I need to check your 4-line. You already did, 20 minutes ago. Then I need to update your chart. Kendra. Don't. She held up a hand, stopping him. Don't ask me questions I can't answer. Don't make me choose between doing the right thing and doing what I want. Just don't. She left before he could respond, before the tears building behind her eyes could fall. In the medical office, she sat in the dark and tried to figure out how everything had gotten so complicated. 6 weeks ago, this had been simple. A high-paying contract, a patient who needed care, clear professional boundaries. Now those boundaries felt like prison walls, and she couldn't tell anymore if they were keeping danger out or keeping her trapped inside. Her phone lit up with a text from Trinity. How's Mr. Morally Bankrupt Hot Guy? Kendra stared at the message, then typed, I think I'm in trouble. What kind of trouble? The kind where I'm falling for the patient I'm supposed to be keeping at arm's length while dating a genuinely good man who deserves better than this. Trinity's response came immediately, *shit. We need to talk. Coffee tomorrow, *. Yeah. I need outside perspective before I do something stupid, *. Too late for that, babe. But we'll figure it out, *. Kendra set the phone down and pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to force back the tears that wanted to fall. She'd worked so hard to build a life that was safe, predictable, free from the chaos she'd grown up in. And now here she was, emotionally tangled with a man whose life was defined by violence and consequence, unable to give her full attention to a relationship with someone who represented everything she should want. When had it all gotten so complicated? The answer, she knew, was the moment Park Jae-sung had looked at her like she was the only solid thing in his collapsing world. The moment she looked back and recognized something of herself in his desperate need for approval, for validation, for someone to see him as more than his worst choices. They were both broken in ways that matched, and that recognition was the most dangerous thing she'd ever felt. The coffee with Trinity happened in a small shop in Pilsen, far enough from both the penthouse and Kendra's apartment to feel like neutral territory. Trinity arrived first, already stationed at a corner table with 2 lattes and an expression that said she was ready for whatever crisis Kendra was about to unload. "Okay," Trinity said before Kendra even sat down. "Talk to me. What's happening with the mob boss?" Kendra sank into the chair and wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, seeking warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. "He told me he has feelings for me. And I didn't immediately shut it down the way I should have." Trinity studied her face for a long moment, then said, "You have feelings for him too." It wasn't a question. Kendra nodded, miserable. "I don't want to. I've tried not to. But Trin, he sees me in ways nobody else does. Not even Liam." "What do you mean?" "With Liam, everything is easy. Pleasant. We have nice dinners and good conversations, and he makes me laugh. But it's all surface level. He doesn't ask hard questions or push me to examine things I'd rather not face. He accepts the version of myself I present without looking for what's underneath." Kendra took a sip of coffee that burned her tongue. "Jae-sung doesn't let me hide. He sees all the broken parts one usually keep locked away, and instead of being scared of them, he recognizes them. Like we're both carrying the same damage, just in different shapes. That's not necessarily healthy, Ken. Sometimes people bond over trauma and mistake it for love." "I know. That's what I keep telling myself. But what if it's not just trauma bonding? What if it's actual understanding?" Trinity was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you love Liam?" The question hit harder than it should have. Kendra opened her mouth to say yes, of course, then found the words stuck in her throat. "I care about him. He's good to me. He's everything I should want." "That's not the same as loving him." "No, it's not." "And do you love Jason?" "I don't know. I don't know if what I feel is love or fascination or some messed up savior complex. All I know is that I can't stop thinking about him, and when I'm with Liam I feel guilty because part of me is always somewhere else." Trinity reached across the table and squeezed Kendra's hand. "You need to make a choice. It's not fair to Liam to stay with him while your heart is somewhere else. And it's not fair to yourself to stay in a relationship because it's safe when you clearly want something different. But what Jae-sung wants, what we want, it can't work. He's a patient. He's a criminal. His life is dangerous and complicated and everything I've tried to avoid." "Is it though? Or is that the excuse you're using because you're scared?" The words landed like a slap, true and uncomfortable. Kendra pulled her hand back, wrapping both arms around herself. "Of course I'm scared. You didn't see the crime scene photos, Trin. The warehouse where they cornered him. 6 men died protecting him, and he barely survived. That's the world he comes from. That's what loving him would mean. But he's not in that world anymore. The deal he made dismantled his organization. He's cooperating with investigators. For all practical purposes, he's left that life behind. On paper. But people don't change that easily. Don't they? You changed. You went from a scared kid in Englewood to a nurse saving lives. You made yourself into something completely different from where you started." Trinity leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Maybe give him the same chance you demanded for yourself." Kendra wanted to argue, but the words rang with an uncomfortable truth. She had changed, radically and completely, through sheer determination and the refusal to accept the limitations other people tried to place on her. Who was she to say Jae-sung couldn't do the same? "I need to talk to Liam," Kendra said finally. "Even if I don't pursue anything with Jae-sung, it's not fair to stay with Liam when my heart isn't fully in it." "That's the right call." "And Ken?" Trinity waited until Kendra met her eyes. "Whatever you decide, make sure it's because of what you actually want, not what you think you should want. You've spent your whole life making the safe choice. Maybe it's time to risk something." That evening, Kendra invited Liam to her apartment instead of going out. She cooked dinner, jerk chicken and rice and peas, comfort food that reminded her of Sunday dinners with her aunt, and tried to find the words to say what needed saying. They ate in relative silence, Liam chatting about hospital politics while Kendra pushed food around her plate. Finally, when they'd moved to the couch with wine neither of them was drinking, Liam set down his glass and turned to face her. "You're breaking up with me." Kendra's head snapped up. "What?" "I'm not blind, Kendra. You've been distant for weeks. Distracted. Like you're here, but not really here." His expression was sad but not angry, resigned in a way that suggested he'd been expecting this. "It's him, isn't it? The patient." "Liam. It's okay. I'm not mad. Just disappointed, I guess. I really liked what we were building." "I liked it too. That's what makes this so hard." Kendra set down her own wine, needing both hands free to gesture. "You're a good man. You're kind and funny and you treat me well. You're everything I should want. But it's not enough. And that's not your fault, it's mine. I thought safe and uncomplicated was what I needed, but somewhere along the way I realized I need something else. Something that challenges me and pushes me and sees all the parts of myself I usually hide." "He's a criminal, Kendra." "I know. He built an organization that hurt people." "I know that too. So what exactly do you see in him?" Kendra struggled to find words for something she barely understood herself. "Recognition. Understanding. The way he looks at me like he sees straight through every defense I've built and isn't afraid of what's underneath. With you, I can be the version of myself that's put together and successful. With him, I have to be the version that's still broken and struggling and scared, and somehow that feels more honest." Liam was quiet for a long moment, processing this. "Then, I hope you know what you're risking. Not just professionally, but personally. Men like him don't change easily, and the world they come from doesn't let go without a fight." "I know. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're about to throw away everything you've built for someone who might destroy you." He stood, gathering his jacket. "But it's your choice to make. I just hope it's worth it." He left without anger, just quiet disappointment that somehow hurt worse than rage would have. Kendra sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by the life she'd carefully constructed, and wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life or finally being honest about what she wanted. She didn't go back to the penthouse that night. Or the next day. She called in, claiming a personal emergency, and spent 48 hours alone with her thoughts, trying to figure out what came next. She couldn't pursue anything with Jae-sung while he was still her patient. That was both professionally unethical and personally dangerous. But the contract ended in 4 months, and after that, what? He'd still be a man whose past was soaked in violence. Still someone whose choices had gotten people killed. Still dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with whether he meant to hurt her. But he was also someone who was trying to change. Who looked at her like she was worth fighting for. Who understood the weight of wanting approval from people who couldn't give it and the desperate need to become something other than what circumstances tried to make you. On the 3rd day, Kendra returned to work with a plan. She would maintain strict professional boundaries for the remainder of the contract. Would help Jae-sung complete his recovery and transition back to whatever life awaited him after house arrest. And then, when he was no longer her patient, when the ethical complications no longer applied, she would make a decision about whether what they felt for each other could survive outside the artificial intimacy of a medical relationship. It was a good plan. Logical. Safe as anything involving Park Jae-sung could be. She made it exactly 3 hours before the plan fell apart. It happened during a routine physical therapy session. Jae-sung was working on advanced mobility exercises, balance work that required concentration and coordination he'd rebuilt over months of painful progress. Kendra was supervising, keeping one hand near his elbow in case he stumbled, when his ankle rolled and he pitched forward. Her training took over. She caught him, bracing his weight against her own, and they ended up pressed together for a handful of seconds that felt suspended outside time. Close enough that she could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, could smell the clean soap scent of his skin, could see the exact moment his eyes found hers, and something electric passed between them. I've got you, Kendra heard herself say. I know, Jae-sung replied, and the way he said it carried layers of meaning that had nothing to do with physical therapy. They separated slowly, Kendra's professional instincts screaming at her to create distance, while something else entirely kept her rooted in place. The moment stretched, heavy with everything they hadn't said, until Dr. Okafor's voice from the doorway shattered it. Everything okay? Fine, Kendra said, stepping back with what she hoped looked like professional composure. Just a minor balance issue. We're continuing the session. But her hands shook as she made notes on his chart, and when she risked a glance at Jae-sung, his expression carried a certainty that made her breath catch. He knew that something had shifted in those few seconds of physical contact, that the boundaries she'd tried to maintain had just become more suggestion than rule. That night, after her shift ended and she was sitting in her car in the parking garage trying to make sense of everything, her phone rang. Trinity's name flashed on the screen. Hey, Kendra answered, exhaustion making her voice rough. I did something you might be mad about, Trinity said without preamble. What? I talked to my cousin who works in the state's attorney office. Asked her about your mob boss's case. Ken, there's stuff you need to know. Kendra's grip tightened on the phone. What kind of stuff? The kind that explains why he agreed to cooperate so completely with investigators. It wasn't just about reducing his sentence. Trinity paused, then said carefully, he's been helping them build cases against 3 major syndicates. But one of them, the Volkov organization, they've figured out he's the source. They're under heavy surveillance so they can't get to him directly, but what? But they're looking for leverage. People close to him. Family, friends, anyone they could use to send a message. Another pause. His medical team is explicitly protected under the terms of his deal. You're supposed to be safe. But Ken, if they know you're more than just his nurse. The implication hung in the air between them, cold and terrible. Kendra's mind raced through scenarios, each worse than the last. How did you find this out? My cousin's working on the periphery of the case. She's not supposed to talk about it, but when I told her you were on his medical team, she got worried. Said I should warn you to be careful. To maintain distance. I broke up with Liam. I know. I think that was the right call regardless. But Ken, whatever you're feeling for this guy, you need to be smart about it. This isn't just about professional ethics anymore. This is about actual danger. After they hung up, Kendra sat in the parking garage for another hour, turning Trinity's words over in her mind. She should walk away. Should request reassignment, finish out the contract from a distance, protect herself from complications both professional and personal. But the thought of leaving him to face this alone made something in her chest ache with a fierceness that had nothing to do with logic. The next morning, she arrived at the penthouse early and found Jae-sung in the kitchen, mobile enough now to move around the space without assistance, making coffee with the careful movements of someone still relearning their body's capabilities. He looked up when she entered, surprise flashing across his face. You're not scheduled until noon. I know. We need to talk. Something in her tone made him set down the coffee pot and give her his full attention. Okay. I know about the Volkov organization. I know they've figured out you're cooperating with investigators. And I know that puts everyone close to you at risk. Jae-sung went very still. How do you know that? That doesn't matter. What matters is that you've been putting my life in danger by pursuing this, whatever this is between us. If they think I'm more than just medical personnel, they don't. I've been careful to make sure all our interactions appear purely professional. His voice was tight with controlled emotion. You're protected under my deal. Explicitly. That was one of my non-negotiable conditions. On paper. But if someone decides to send you a message, then they deal with me. Not you. Never you. He moved closer, stopping just short of touching her. Kendra, I would never put you in danger intentionally. The only reason I've allowed myself to feel anything for you is because I made sure you were protected first. Federal protection, private security, the works. You're safer now than you've ever been. That's not the point. The point is I deserve to make informed decisions about my own safety, and you kept this from me. You're right. I should have told you. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration and something else, fear, flickering across his face. I was afraid if you knew the full scope of the complications, you'd run. And I couldn't. I needed you to stay. Why? Because you're the only thing that makes me want to be better. The only person who looks at me and sees potential instead of just damage. And yes, that's selfish and unfair and probably a dozen other things a therapist would call unhealthy, but it's true. His dark eyes held hers, raw with honesty. I'm not asking you to love me, Kendra. I'm not even asking you to stay past your contract. I'm just asking for the chance to prove I can become someone worthy of the way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications and possibility and danger. Kendra should say no. Should walk away from this impossible situation and protect herself from the complications that came with caring about someone whose world was defined by violence and consequence. Instead, she heard herself say, "Show me." What? Show me. Prove you can change. Not with words, with actions. Prove that this isn't just transference or proximity or some psychological reaction to forced intimacy. Prove that you can build a life outside violence, that you can become someone who doesn't put the people around him at risk. And if I do? Then we'll see what happens when this contract ends and you're not my patient anymore. Something like hope flickered across Jae-sung's face, quickly suppressed but unmistakable. How long do I have? For months. The rest of your house arrest. For months to become someone different. Or at least someone trying. Kendra moved toward the door, needing distance before she did something irrevocable. Professional boundaries until then, Mr. Park. No more late-night conversations. No more moments like yesterday during physical therapy. I'll provide medical care and nothing else. Agreed. Agreed. He paused, then added, "Thank you. For not walking away. Don't thank me yet. You might not be able to do this. I will. I have to." The certainty in his voice followed Kendra all the way to the medical office, where she updated his chart and tried to ignore the way her hands trembled slightly. She'd just committed to something that could ruin her career, endanger her life, and break her heart. But somehow, the alternative, walking away and never knowing what they could have been, felt even worse. Over the following weeks, Kendra watched Jae-sung transform. Not dramatically, not overnight, but in small, consistent ways that suggested genuine change. He started taking online business classes through a prison education program, legitimate courses in accounting and management. Started donating to causes, children's literacy programs in underprivileged neighborhoods, organizations that helped formerly incarcerated people transition back to society. Started meeting regularly with a trauma therapist beyond the required sessions with Dr. Chin. He also started divesting from everything connected to his previous life. Selling off properties, liquidating accounts, severing ties with anyone who'd been part of the organization. His lawyers argued it was too aggressive, that he was destroying wealth he'd need for future legal fees, but he insisted. Everything had to go. Everything had to be clean. "Why are you doing this?" Kendra asked one evening during routine vitals check. She'd maintained professional boundaries as promised, but couldn't help the curiosity that crept into her voice. "Because you asked me to prove I could change. This is how I do that." He met her eyes, steady and certain. "Every connection to my old life is a chain keeping me tied to who I was. I'm breaking every chain. And what will you do after? When the house arrest ends and you have nothing left? Build something new. Something legitimate. Something that helps instead of hurts." He paused, then added quietly, "Something you wouldn't be ashamed to be associated with." The words landed in Kendra's chest like a promise, dangerous and compelling. She updated his chart and left without responding, but that night she lay awake thinking about transformation. About whether people could really change, or if they just got better at hiding who they'd always been. She wanted to believe Jae-sung was different. Wanted to believe the changes she was witnessing were real and lasting. But she'd seen too many people in her nursing career make promises they couldn't keep, had watched addiction and violence and self-destruction win out over good intentions time and again. 2 months into their agreement, something shifted. Jae-sung received notification that 3% of his remaining assets, approximately $15 million, needed to be allocated per the terms of his cooperation agreement. Most defendants used this for legal fees and fines. Instead, Jae-sung donated the entire amount to establishing an NGO focused on providing educational opportunities for children in underserved communities. The news made local headlines. Reformed crime boss donates millions to education. Kendra read the articles on her phone during her lunch break, studying the photo they'd used, a shot from before his arrest when his eyes had been harder, more calculating. The man in that photo looked nothing like the person she saw every day, the one who struggled through physical therapy with quiet determination and spoke about building something meaningful with his remaining years. "You've been making the news," she said that evening. "I know. The lawyers weren't happy about it. Said it draws unnecessary attention." "Why did you do it?" "Because you asked me to prove I was changing. Money sitting in accounts doesn't prove anything. Using it to help people does." He held her gaze, something vulnerable flickering in his expression. "Besides, I thought about what you said about your mother. How she worked herself to death so you could have opportunities. I can't give her those years back, but maybe I can make sure other kids don't have to watch their parents destroy themselves for lack of opportunity." The gesture was so thoughtful, so specifically tailored to something she'd shared in a moment of vulnerability, that Kendra felt her carefully maintained defenses crack further. This wasn't manipulation. This was genuine understanding translated into action. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you know." "I know. That's why I did it." 3 months into their agreement, with only 1 month remaining on both his house arrest and her contract, Kendra arrived for her shift to find the penthouse in chaos. Security personnel moved through the space with urgent efficiency, checking windows and reinforcing protocols. Dr. Okafor pulled her aside immediately. "What's happening?" "There was an incident. Someone tried to breach building security. They didn't get close, but it's concerning enough that we're implementing additional measures." Kendra's blood ran cold. "The Volkov organization?" "We don't know yet. Could be them, could be someone else entirely. But until we have answers, everyone's on high alert." She found Jae-sung in his room, calmer than she expected given the circumstances. He was reading, or pretending to, his posture too controlled to be natural. "Are you okay?" Kendra asked. "I'm fine. This isn't the first time someone's tried to get to me." "That doesn't make it less terrifying." "No," he agreed. "But it does make it familiar. And familiar I can handle." He set down his book and looked at her properly. "Are you okay? This is probably more than you signed up for." "I knew what I was getting into when I took this contract." "Did you?" "Because knowing something intellectually and experiencing it are different things." His jaw tightened. "If you want to request reassignment, I'll understand. This wasn't supposed to touch you." Kendra crossed her arms, a defensive gesture that felt increasingly useless. "You don't get to make that decision for me." "I'm not. I'm giving you the option." "I don't want the option. I want to do my job." "Is that all you want?" The question hung between them, loaded with everything they'd carefully avoided for 3 months. Kendra knew the safe answer, the professional answer. But she was tired of safe, tired of pretending her feelings were purely clinical, tired of the distance that felt increasingly like a punishment neither of them deserved. "No," she admitted. "That's not all I want. But it's all I can have right now. 1 month." "What?" "1 month until your contract ends. Until I'm no longer your patient and you're no longer my nurse. 1 month and then we figure out what this is without all the professional complications. Assuming you survive the next month." "I will. I have something worth surviving for now." His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You asked me to prove I could change. I'm doing that. But Kendra, I need you to be honest with me. If I become someone different, someone better, is there actually a chance for us? Or am I just performing transformation for someone who's already decided I'm not worth the risk?" It was the most direct he'd been, stripping away the careful distance they'd maintained. Kendra thought about all the logical reasons to say no. The danger. The complications. The fact that loving someone who came from violence meant accepting that violence might always be lurking at the edges. But she also thought about the man he'd been when she first started this contract versus who he was now. The way he'd fought through physical therapy with grim determination. The money donated to help kids like she'd been. The conscious dismantling of everything he'd built in his old life. The small, consistent choices that suggested transformation wasn't just performance. There's a chance, she said finally. I can't promise more than that. But yes, there's a chance. The smile that crossed his face was small but genuine, carrying relief and hope in equal measure. That's enough. That's more than I expected. Security remained heightened for the next week, but no further incidents occurred. The attempted breach turned out to be an overzealous journalist trying to get an exclusive interview, not an assassination attempt. Everyone relaxed slightly, though the reminder of vulnerability kept everyone on edge. Kendra used the incident as excuse to visit more frequently, telling herself it was just to ensure Jae-sung's stress levels weren't impacting his recovery. But she knew she was lying. She came because she wanted to be near him, wanted to see the continued evidence of change, wanted to believe in the possibility of something good emerging from circumstances that should have been purely professional. They didn't cross physical boundaries. Didn't so much as hold hands. But the emotional intimacy deepened with every conversation, every shared story, every moment of vulnerability. Jae-sung told her about the first time he'd hurt someone, 14 years old and defending himself against older kids who'd targeted him for being Korean. How the violence had felt both terrible and powerful, how he'd never forgotten the way fear had looked in his attacker's eyes. I told myself I'd never let anyone make me feel powerless again, he said. And somewhere along the way, that became its own kind of prison. Needing to be feared meant always being alone. Are you still afraid of being powerless? Kendra asked. Every day. But I'm more afraid of being alone. She understood that fear intimately. Had felt it in the years after her mother's death when grief made her push away anyone who tried to get close. Had felt it when she'd started dating Liam, knowing even then that she was choosing safety over genuine connection because being truly seen felt like too much risk. I'm afraid of being seen, Kendra admitted. Really seen. All the broken parts and the anger and the fear. I'm afraid that if someone sees all of that, they'll realize I'm not worth the effort. You're worth every effort and more, Jae-sung said with quiet conviction. Anyone who gets to know you should count themselves lucky. You barely know me. I know the things that matter. I know you're fierce and principled and you care so deeply it scares you. I know you're brilliant at your job because you can't stand the thought of failing someone who needs you. I know you push people away because getting close means risking loss and you've lost too much already. He paused, then added, I know I don't deserve the chance you're giving me, but I'm going to spend however long it takes proving I can be worthy of it. The honesty of it stole her breath. Kendra wanted to kiss him, wanted to cross every remaining boundary and just feel without thinking. But the contract hadn't ended yet, and professional ethics still applied, and she'd worked too hard to throw away her career in a moment of weakness. One more week, she said, as much to remind herself as him. One more week, he agreed. That week stretched like elastic, every day feeling simultaneously too long and too short. Kendra finished her documentation, prepared transition notes for whatever medical team would take over after house arrest ended, tried to figure out what came next. On her final contracted day, she arrived to find Jae-sung standing without assistance, dressed in real clothes instead of medical garments for the first time since she'd met him. The transformation was startling. He looked older somehow, more solid, less like a patient and more like a person ready to rejoin the world. Final assessment, he asked, and there was something in his voice, nervousness, maybe, or hope. Vitals look good. Mobility is excellent. You've exceeded every recovery milestone. Kendra updated the chart for the last time, her hands unsteady. Medically speaking, you're cleared for transition out of house arrest. And non-medically speaking? She set down the tablet and finally let herself look at him properly. Really look, without the filter of professional distance. He changed so much in 6 months. Not just physically, though the return of muscle mass and healthy weight was dramatic. Something deeper had shifted, something in the way he held himself, the way he met her eyes without calculation, like he didn't need to be 3 steps ahead anymore. Non-medically speaking, I think you did what you set out to do. You proved you could change. Was it enough? The question was vulnerable in a way she'd never heard from him. Kendra thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. The boundaries they'd maintained. The conversations that went deeper than either of them planned. The way he'd fought to become someone different not just for himself, but because she'd asked him to. "Come to dinner with me," she said. "Tomorrow night. Not as my patient, not during a medical consultation. Just as two people trying to figure out if what they feel is real." The smile that crossed his face was unguarded, genuinely happy in a way she'd never seen. "Yes. Absolutely yes. I'm picking the restaurant. Somewhere public and well-lit with excellent food. No expensive shows of wealth, no private rooms, just normal people having a normal dinner. Whatever you want. I'm just grateful you're giving me the chance." Kendra gathered her things, preparing to walk out of the penthouse for the final time as his nurse. At the door, she paused and looked back. Jae-sung stood in the middle of the room, watching her with an expression that was equal parts hopeful and terrified. "Don't make me regret this," she said. "I won't. I promise." She left before the emotion building in her chest could spill over, before she could do something unprofessional in the final moments of her contract. In the elevator, riding down 40 floors to street level, Kendra let herself acknowledge the full weight of what she'd just agreed to. She was going to date a former crime boss. Was going to see if the connection they'd built under impossible circumstances could survive in the real world. Was going to risk her heart on someone whose past was soaked in violence and whose future was uncertain. But she was also going to give them a real chance. And that felt like the bravest thing she'd done in years. Trinity called that evening. "So, how did the final day go?" "I have a date tomorrow night." "With the mob boss?" "Former mob boss." "And yes." "Jesus, Ken. Are you sure about this?" "No. But I'm doing it anyway." "Okay. Then I've got your back." "Where are you going?" "Sole vegetarian on 75th. Public place. Good food, my territory." "Smart. And if he tries anything?" "He won't." "I know that's hard to believe, but Trin, he's different now. Or at least trying to be." "I hope you're right. For your sake." After they hung up, Kendra stood at her apartment window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Jae-sung was probably standing at his own window, 40 stories up, looking at the same city and thinking about tomorrow. One dinner. That's all this was. One meal to see if what they'd built in artificial circumstances could translate to real life. If the man he was becoming could exist outside the confines of house arrest and medical supervision. She was terrified and excited in equal measure, and for the first time in years, she felt fully, completely alive. The restaurant was exactly what Kendra needed it to be: comfortable, unpretentious, filled with the warm smell of seasoned vegetables and curry. She arrived first, claiming a table near the window where she could watch the street. When Jae-sung walked in 10 minutes later, she almost didn't recognize him. He'd cut his hair shorter, styled it differently. Wore jeans and a simple button-down instead of expensive tailoring. Moved with the slight caution of someone still rebuilding confidence in their body. Nothing about him screamed wealth or danger. He just looked like a regular person, maybe someone recovering from illness, maybe someone trying to make a good impression on a first date. "Hi," he said, sliding into the chair across from her. "Hi yourself." They studied each other for a moment, the strangeness of the situation settling between them. 6 months of intense proximity, of professional boundaries and carefully maintained distance, and now here they were. Just two people in a restaurant trying to figure out if what they'd felt was real. "This is weird," Kendra said finally. Jason laughed, surprising them both. "Yeah, it is. I don't know how to do this without medical equipment between us." "Neither do I. Should I take my blood pressure so you feel more comfortable?" Despite herself, Kendra smiled. "Maybe later. Let's try normal conversation first." They ordered food. She got the barbecue tofu platter, he chose curry chickpeas, and talked about safe topics. The weather. The restaurant's history. Neutral territory that let them ease into being around each other without professional structure. But eventually, inevitably, the conversation turned deeper. "What are you going to do now?" Kendra asked. "After house arrest officially ends next week. I've been accepted into a business management program at Northwestern. Part-time, since I still have to report for monitoring. Figure if I'm going to build something legitimate, I should actually understand how legitimate businesses work." "That's good. Smart. I also started volunteering with a youth literacy organization in Englewood. teaching reading comprehension to kids who are behind grade level. He paused, then added, your neighborhood. I thought maybe I could do some good there. Something in Kendra's chest tightened. You don't have to do that for me. I'm not. I'm doing it for the kids. But I'd be lying if I said your stories didn't inspire it. He met her eyes across the table. You told me about being one of those kids, about how hard your mother worked to give you opportunities. I can't give time back to her, but maybe I can give some to kids in similar situations. Thank you, Kendra said quietly, meaning it. That means a lot. Their food arrived and they ate in comfortable silence for a while. The restaurant filled with evening customers, families and couples and groups of friends enjoying meals together. Normal life happening all around them. It felt surreal, this glimpse of what ordinary could look like. Can I ask you something? Jae-sung said eventually. Yeah. Are you scared? Of this? Of me? Kendra considered lying, softening the truth, but they'd built their connection on honesty. Yes. I'm terrified. Not that you'll hurt me physically, I don't believe you would. But that I'll invest in this, in you, and discover that the person you became during house arrest doesn't exist once you're back in the world. That violence will call you back, or that the consequences of your past will catch up in ways that destroy us both. Those are valid fears. But I'm more afraid of not trying. I'm more afraid of looking back in 5 years and wondering what we could have been if I'd been braver. He set down his fork, giving her his complete attention. Kendra, I can't promise I won't make mistakes. I can't promise the past won't have repercussions. But I can promise I'll fight every day to be someone worth your time. Someone you don't have to be ashamed of. I've never been ashamed of you. Haven't you? Even a little. The question forced her to examine her own feelings with uncomfortable honesty. Had she been ashamed? Of his past, certainly. Of his choices and their consequences. But of him, the person he was becoming? No, that had never been the problem. I've been afraid, she admitted. Afraid of what caring about you says about me. Afraid of what people will think when they find out I'm dating a former criminal. Afraid of losing the professional reputation I worked so hard to build. She paused, then added, but shame? No, I'm not ashamed of you. Good. Because I don't want you to spend your life defending choices you're uncertain about. Who says I'm uncertain? Are you? Kendra thought about the past 6 months. The gradual shift from professional distance to personal investment. The way she'd found excuses to be near him even when logic said she should stay away. The breaking point with Liam because her heart was already somewhere else. I'm uncertain about a lot of things, she said finally. But not about wanting to see where this goes. The smile he gave her was relief and hope combined. That's all I'm asking for. A chance. They finished dinner and walked along 75th Street, the evening warm enough that neither needed a jacket. Jae-sung moved carefully, still building back stamina, but he kept pace beside her without complaint. They passed storefronts and bus stops and people going about their lives, and for the first time since this whole thing started, Kendra could imagine a future where this felt normal. Where dating him wasn't a complication, but just part of her life. I should tell you something, Jae-sung said as they walked. About the Volkov organization. Kendra's stomach tightened. What about them? They've been neutralized. The federal investigation wrapped up last week and the leadership is facing RICO charges. They're no longer a threat. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I wanted tonight to be about us, not about danger and consequences. But you deserve to know, the specific threat that made this complicated is gone. Relief washed through Kendra so intense it made her dizzy. She'd been carrying that fear for months, the knowledge that caring about him might put her in danger. Knowing that particular threat was removed didn't eliminate all risk, but it lifted an enormous weight. Other threats still exist though, she said, needing to be realistic. Some. People who lost money, people who want revenge, people who just don't like loose ends. But nothing organized. Nothing with the resources to actually do damage. He stopped walking, turning to face her. I won't lie to you about the dangers. But I want you to know I've done everything possible to minimize them. New identity documentation, security protocols, relocation options if necessary. Everything to keep you safe. And what about keeping yourself safe? That's secondary. Jae-sung. I mean it. If choosing between my safety and yours ever comes up, I choose yours every time. No hesitation. The declaration was both romantic and terrifying. Kendra didn't want to be someone whose safety came at the cost of his. Didn't want their relationship built on his willingness to sacrifice himself. But the fierceness in his eyes told her arguing would be pointless. This was non-negotiable for him. How about we both stay safe, she said instead. Novel concept, I know, but humor me. I can work with that. They continued walking, eventually circling back to where Kendra had parked. At her car, Jae-sung stopped and seemed to be working up courage for something. Can I see you again? He asked. Tomorrow? The day after? Whenever you're free. Tomorrow's good. I'm not working until evening. There's a Korean cultural center I've been meaning to visit. They have language classes and cooking workshops. I thought maybe. He trailed off, looking uncertain in a way she'd never seen during his house arrest. Sorry, that's probably too much for a second date. It's not too much. I'd like to see that part of your culture. Kendra paused, then added, will your parents be there? Given that it's a cultural center. No. They've made it very clear they want nothing to do with me. But I thought maybe I could reconnect with parts of my heritage that aren't tied to their expectations. Build my own relationship with being Korean instead of just carrying their disappointment. The vulnerability in his voice made Kendra reach out without thinking, her hand finding his. It was the first time they'd held hands, the first deliberate physical contact outside medical necessity. His fingers curled around hers, warm and slightly uncertain. I'd like that, she said. Seeing you figure out who you want to be instead of what others expected. They stood there in the parking lot, holding hands like teenagers, neither wanting to be the first to let go. Eventually, Kendra forced herself to step back, to acknowledge that she needed to leave before she did something reckless like invite him home. Text me the details for tomorrow, she said. I will. And Kendra. He waited until she met his eyes. Thank you. For taking a chance on me. Don't make me regret it. I won't. She drove home with her hand tingling from where he'd held it, her mind replaying the evening in careful detail. It had been easy. Natural. The man across the table from her had been thoughtful and honest and working hard to build something better. All the qualities she'd watched develop over 6 months of medical supervision, now translated into real-world context. Maybe this could work. Maybe they could build something that survived outside the artificial intensity of house arrest and medical necessity. Maybe transformation was real and lasting. Her phone buzzed with a text as she pulled into her apartment complex. From Jae-sung, * details for tomorrow, Korean Cultural Center, 10 a.m. Cooking class on traditional temple food. Then maybe walk through the gardens? Let me know if that works, *. Kendra smiled, typing back, * perfect. I'll meet you there, *. She fell asleep that night thinking about tomorrow, about the future suddenly opening up with possibility. For the first time in months, fear didn't dominate her thoughts. Hope did. The next morning arrived bright and clear, the kind of Chicago summer day that made residents forget the brutal winters. Kendra dressed carefully, jeans and a light sweater, comfortable shoes for walking. Nothing too formal, nothing that suggested she was trying too hard. Just herself, meeting someone she cared about for a day, exploring his heritage. The Korean Cultural Center was in Ravenswood, a beautiful building that blended traditional architecture with modern design. Jae-sung waited outside, and his face lit up when he saw her in a way that made her heart skip. Ready? He asked. Ready. The cooking class was small, just 8 participants learning to make traditional temple cuisine, dishes that Buddhist monks ate during meditation retreats. Simple ingredients prepared with intention and care. The instructor was an older Korean woman who spoke primarily in Korean with English translation, and Kendra watched Jae-sung's face as he listened, seeing him connect with language and culture in real time. He translated some of the instructions for her when the English wasn't quite clear, his voice carrying a comfort she hadn't heard before. Like being here, engaged with this part of himself, settled something inside him. They made kimchi pancakes and sesame spinach and a mild tofu stew. Worked side by side chopping vegetables and mixing batter, their movements gradually synchronizing into an easy rhythm. At one point his hand brushed hers reaching for ingredients, and they both paused, that electric awareness sparking between them again. "Sorry," he said. "Don't be." After class they ate what they'd made, sitting in the center's dining area with the other participants. An elderly Korean man struck up conversation with Jae-sung, asking questions in rapid Korean that Jae-sung answered with increasing ease. Kendra couldn't understand most of it, but she caught enough cognates and context to follow the general thread, questions about family, about work, about what brought him here. When the man left, Jae-sung turned to Kendra with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What did you tell him?" she asked. "That I'm trying to reconnect with my culture after spending too long running from it. That I'm here with someone important to me who I'm hoping will be patient while I figure out who I want to be." "Am I important to you?" "More than I have words for." They spent the afternoon walking through the center's gardens, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in Seoul until age 12, the confusion and displacement of moving to Chicago, trying to belong in both cultures and feeling accepted by neither. She told him about growing up Black in Englewood, the particular weight of being simultaneously hypervisible and invisible, seen as a threat by some and overlooked by others. "I think that's why I became a nurse," Kendra said as they sat on a bench surrounded by carefully tended flowers. "It was the first thing that made me feel genuinely valuable. Like I was contributing something that mattered beyond just surviving." "You're valuable independent of what you contribute." "I know that intellectually. But emotionally," she shrugged. "Still working on it." "We both are. Working on being enough just as ourselves, without having to prove anything." His hand found hers on the bench, and this time neither of them pulled away. They sat there in comfortable silence, watching other visitors move through the gardens, existing in a moment that felt suspended from consequence. Eventually Kendra's phone buzzed with a reminder about her evening shift. Reality intruding on their perfect day. She checked the time and sighed. "I need to go. Work in 2 hours." "Okay." But Jae-sung didn't immediately stand. "Can I ask you something first?" "Always." "What are we doing? I mean, are we dating? Are we seeing where this goes? I just want to know how to think about this." Kendra considered the question, the vulnerability behind it. He was asking for definition, for something concrete to hold on to. She understood that need intimately. "We're dating," she said. "Taking it slow, figuring things out, but yes, dating." The relief on his face was unmistakable. "Okay, good. I just needed to know." They walked back to the parking lot together, and at Kendra's car Jae-sung pulled her into a hug that surprised them both. His arms came around her gently, giving her space to pull away if she wanted. But she didn't want to. She let herself sink into the embrace, breathing in his scent, feeling the solid reality of him after months of professional distance. "Thank you for today," he said softly, his breath warm against her hair. "Thank you for sharing it with me." They separated slowly, reluctantly. Kendra got in her car and drove to work with a smile she couldn't quite suppress, feeling lighter than she had in months. The next 3 weeks fell into a pattern that felt almost normal. Dates at restaurants and museums and parks. Long conversations that started about simple things and ended in vulnerable territory. Slow, careful building of something that felt increasingly solid. Jae-sung's house arrest officially ended, and with it came the ankle monitor removal and the beginning of his supervised release period. He moved from the penthouse to a modest apartment in Lincoln Park, nothing like the luxury he'd inhabited before but clean and comfortable and his own. Kendra helped him move, along with Trinity, who'd insisted on meeting him properly. "So you're the mob boss," Trinity said when introductions were made. "Former mob boss," Jae-sung corrected with a small smile. "Currently just a guy trying to furnish an apartment. And dating my best friend. Also that. Hopefully doing it well." Trinity studied him for a long moment, and Kendra could see her friend's natural protectiveness warring with the need to give this a fair chance. Finally, Trinity said, "She cares about you. A lot. More than she wants to admit even to herself. So whatever your intentions are, they better be serious." "They are. I promise you, I'm not taking any of this lightly." "Good. Because if you hurt her, mob connections or not, you'll have me to deal with." And I'm way scarier than any organized crime syndicate. Despite the tension, Jae-sung laughed. I believe you. They spent the day assembling furniture and unpacking boxes, Trinity grilling Jae-sung with questions he answered patiently and honestly. By the end of it, Trinity pulled Kendra aside in the kitchen. Okay, I get it now, Trinity said. I see why you're willing to risk this. Yeah. He looks at you like you hung the moon. And more importantly, he actually listens when you talk. Like really listens, not just waiting for his turn to speak. He's good at that. He's good at a lot of things, including being genuinely interested in becoming someone better. Trinity hugged her friend tightly. I'm still worried. I'm still going to watch this closely. But Ken, I think you might have found something real here. Kendra wanted to believe it. Every day with Jae-sung reinforced that belief, showed her evidence of lasting change. He attended his monitoring appointments without complaint, kept up with Northwestern classes, volunteered regularly with the literacy organization, built a life that was clean and purposeful and nowhere near the violence of his past. They hadn't slept together yet, hadn't even really kissed beyond brief, careful contact. Both of them seemed to understand that rushing physical intimacy would complicate things they were still figuring out. But the tension was there, building slowly, the awareness that eventually they'd need to decide how far this went. That decision came one evening 6 weeks into dating. They were at Jae-sung's apartment, cooking dinner together. She'd introduced him to soul food, and he was determined to master collard greens. The kitchen was warm from cooking, music playing softly from his phone, and everything felt comfortable in a way Kendra hadn't experienced before. Jae-sung was stirring the greens when he said, seemingly casually, I got called in for another debriefing tomorrow. Federal prosecutors want to go over testimony again before some of the trials start. Kendra looked up from where she was seasoning chicken. Are you worried? A little. Testifying against people I used to work with feels. He trailed off, searching for words. Necessary but complicated. These were people I trusted, who trusted me. Betraying that trust was the right call, but it doesn't feel good. That's because you're not a sociopath. Guilt over doing the right thing means you understand consequences. I guess. He was quiet for a moment, then, will you come with me? To the courthouse? You can't be in the room obviously, but just knowing you're there would help. The request surprised her. They'd been careful about keeping their relationship somewhat private, both aware that public visibility could create complications. But he was asking her to be present for something important, something difficult. Of course I'll come, Kendra said. What time? 9 a.m. Should be done by noon. The next morning they met outside the Dirksen Federal Building, both dressed more formally than usual. Jae-sung wore a suit that made him look older, more serious. Kendra wore slacks and a blazer, professional armor that felt necessary in this environment. I'll wait in the lobby, she said. Text me when you're done. Thank you for being here. She watched him disappear into the elevator, flanked by lawyers and federal marshals, and felt the weight of what he was doing. Testifying against former allies. Helping dismantle organizations he'd once tried to work with. Burning every bridge back to his old life in the name of becoming someone different. It was brave and terrifying and absolutely necessary. Kendra found a bench in the lobby and settled in to wait, pulling out a book she'd brought. The building was busy with people moving through various legal proceedings, all of them carrying their own complicated stories. She wondered how many of them were like Jae-sung, trying to make better choices after bad ones. How many were beyond saving, and how many just needed someone to believe change was possible. 3 hours later, Jae-sung emerged looking exhausted. His tie was loosened, his face drawn with the kind of fatigue that came from sustained stress. Kendra stood immediately, moving to meet him. How did it go? As well as could be expected. The defense attorneys weren't gentle. He managed a weak smile. But it's done. At least until the actual trial. They left the building and walked aimlessly for a while, neither ready to separate yet. Eventually, they ended up at Millennium Park, sitting on a bench with a bean sculpture reflecting distorted versions of the city around them. Want to talk about it? Kendra asked. Not really. I just want to sit here with you and remember why I'm doing this. And why is that? He turned to look at her, his expression serious. Because the person I was couldn't be with you. Could never deserve you. So I had to become someone different. The words landed in Kendra's chest like a promise and a burden both. Jae-sung, I need you to understand something. I never asked you to change for me. If that's why you're doing this, it's not just for you. It's for myself too. But you're a big part of it. He reached for her hand, threading their fingers together. You showed me what actual integrity looks like. What it means to build something worth having instead of taking what you want regardless of cost. I needed that example. I'm not perfect. I have plenty of flaws. I know. But you try. Every day, you try to be better, to help people, to live according to your values even when it's hard. That's more than I ever did before meeting you. Kendra leaned against him, letting her head rest on his shoulder. They sat like that for a long time, watching people move through the park, tourists taking photos and locals cutting through on their way elsewhere. Normal life happening around them while they existed in their own small bubble. Eventually, Jae-sung's phone buzzed with a message. He checked it, and his expression tightened in a way that immediately put Kendra on alert. What is it? My lawyer. Apparently there's an issue with one of the trials. Someone's asking questions about my medical team during house arrest. He scrolled through the message, frowning. Specifically about you. Kendra's stomach dropped. What kind of questions? They want to know the nature of our relationship. Whether it predates the end of your contract. Whether I received preferential treatment or if there was any inappropriate conduct. That's ridiculous. We maintained professional boundaries the entire time. I know. But someone's trying to undermine my credibility by suggesting otherwise. He looked at her with worry clear in his eyes. This could affect your nursing license. If they pursue it seriously, let them pursue it. We didn't do anything wrong. We came close though. Those conversations, the emotional intimacy, a hostile attorney could twist that into something it wasn't. Kendra felt anger rising, hot and fierce. They'd been so careful. Had maintained boundaries even when it hurt, had waited until the contract ended to pursue anything romantic. And now someone wanted to use that against them, to punish them for doing things right. Who's raising these questions? She asked. Defense attorney for one of the Volkov organization leaders. He's trying to discredit my testimony by suggesting I'm emotionally unstable, that I formed inappropriate attachments during recovery. Jae-sung's jaw tightened. He's going to subpoena you. Make you testify about our relationship. Then I'll testify. I'll tell them exactly what happened, that you were my patient, that I maintained professional ethics, and that any personal relationship began only after my contract ended. They'll try to make it seem sordid. Like you were sleeping with a patient, like I manipulated you. Let them try. I know the truth, you know the truth, and we have documentation supporting every claim. Kendra squeezed his hand. This is just intimidation tactics. They want you to back down from testifying. I know. And I'm not going to. But he looked worried in a way that made her chest ache. I just don't want this to hurt you. I'm tougher than I look. I know you are. But you shouldn't have to be tough against attacks that exist because of me. They left the park and went back to Jae-sung's apartment, both of them subdued. The subpoena arrived 2 days later, officially requiring Kendra to testify in a preliminary hearing about her professional conduct during the house arrest period. Trinity was furious when Kendra told her, "This is bullshit. You did everything right." I know. But doing everything right doesn't always protect you from people who want to tear you down. What are you going to do? Testify. Tell the truth. Let the chips fall where they fall. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out, giving Kendra plenty of time to panic and second-guess every decision she'd made. The Illinois Board of Nursing sent her a formal letter asking for her account of events. Her former supervisor from the hospital called to check in, concern clear in his voice. Word was spreading through the nursing community that Kendra Williams might have crossed ethical lines with a patient. It was nightmare, watching her reputation, something she'd built through years of excellent work, get questioned because of her relationship with Jae-sung. She tried not to blame him. Knew logically this wasn't his fault, that he was being targeted and she was collateral damage. But late at night, alone in her apartment, she couldn't help wondering if this was the universe's way of telling her she'd made a terrible mistake. Jae-sung called her every day, checking in, offering support, repeatedly apologizing even though none of this was his choice. She could hear the guilt in his voice, the fear that this would be the thing that drove her away. "I'm not leaving," she told him during one particularly difficult call. "This is scary and frustrating and unfair, but I'm not walking away." "You should. This is only going to get worse before it gets better." "Maybe. But I made a choice to be with you, and I'm standing by that choice. Even if it costs you your career?" The question hung heavy between them. Kendra thought about everything nursing meant to her. The identity she'd built, the purpose she'd found, the way helping people made her feel valuable in ways nothing else did. Losing that would devastate her. But losing him would devastate her too, in different ways. And more than that, walking away now would mean letting fear win. Letting people who wanted to use their relationship as a weapon succeed in tearing them apart. "It won't cost me my career," she said with more confidence than she felt. "Because I didn't do anything wrong, and the truth will bear that out." The preliminary hearing arrived too quickly and not fast enough. Kendra, dressed in her most professional outfit, hair pulled back, minimal jewelry, every inch the competent medical professional. Jae-sung met her outside the courthouse, looking as nervous as she'd ever seen him. "You don't have to do this," he said. "We could leave. Go somewhere they can't find us. Start over." "Running isn't starting over. It's just hiding." Kendra took his hand, squeezing firmly. "We face this head-on. I love you." The words stopped her completely. He'd never said them before. Had implied, had shown through actions, but never actually spoken those 3 words. And he'd chosen now, standing outside a courthouse where she was about to defend their relationship, to finally say it. "You have terrible timing," Kendra said, but her voice was gentle. "I know. But I needed you to hear it before you go in there. No matter what happens, no matter how this turns out, I love you. And I'm grateful for every moment you've given me." Kendra reached up and kissed him, brief but fierce, in full view of anyone watching. When she pulled back, his eyes were wide with surprise and something else, hope, maybe, or relief. "I love you too," she said. "Now, let's go prove we didn't do anything wrong." The hearing room was smaller than she expected, more like a conference room than a courtroom. Kendra took her seat at the table, facing a panel of 3 attorneys, one representing Jae-sung's prosecution case, one from the defense trying to discredit him, and one from the nursing board ethics committee. They started with basic questions. Her qualifications, her contract terms, the scope of her medical responsibilities. Easy territory that let her establish credibility. Then they moved into more dangerous ground. "Ms. Williams, during the 6 months you provided medical care to Mr. Park, did you ever have conversations of a personal nature with him?" Kendra met the defense attorney's eyes steadily. "Yes. Personal conversations were part of the therapeutic approach recommended by Dr. Chin, the psychiatrist assigned to Mr. Park's case. Isolation and lack of meaningful social interaction were impeding his recovery." "And what was the nature of these personal conversations?" Mr. Park shared information about his background, his motivations, his goals for the future. "I provided empathetic listening and occasionally shared relevant experiences from my own life to help establish trust and therapeutic rapport." "Relevant experiences such as?" "My mother's death. My experience growing up in an underserved community. The challenges of building a career from limited circumstances." Kendra kept her voice steady, clinical. These were appropriate self-disclosures within the therapeutic framework. "Did you develop romantic feelings for Mr. Park during this period?" "I developed respect for his determination to change. Admiration for his commitment to recovery. Whether those feelings evolved into something more is difficult to pinpoint temporally, but I maintained strict professional boundaries throughout my contract period." "But you began dating him immediately after the contract ended?" "Within a week, yes. Once the professional relationship concluded and ethical barriers no longer applied." The defense attorney leaned forward, scenting blood. "Ms. Williams, isn't it true that you requested reassignment from Mr. Park's care at one point during the contract, specifically because of inappropriate feelings?" Kendra's stomach clenched. They'd done their homework, found the documentation. "I considered reassignment, yes. I felt that boundaries were becoming unclear and wanted to ensure professional integrity. But you didn't follow through with that reassignment. Why not? Because Mr. Park agreed to maintain appropriate boundaries, and his recovery was progressing well. Changing primary nurses would have disrupted continuity of care. Or was it because you couldn't stay away from him? Objection, the prosecuting attorney interjected. That's speculation and inflammatory. Sustained, the ethics committee representative said. Rephrase your question. The defense attorney tried a different angle. Ms. Williams, did you spend time with Mr. Park outside your contracted hours? I picked up additional shifts, yes. That's standard practice when a case is complex and requires consistent monitoring. These additional shifts, were they assigned by the medical coordinator, or did you volunteer for them? I volunteered. Why? Kendra took a breath, knowing her answer would be picked apart. Mr. Park was struggling with insomnia and anxiety. His recovery was complicated by psychological factors. I felt that continuity of care from a familiar provider would be beneficial. And it had nothing to do with personal feelings? Personal feelings informed my professional judgment about what would be most effective for the patient's recovery. That's not unethical, it's good nursing. The questioning continued for 2 hours, circling back over the same territory from different angles. Trying to catch her in inconsistencies, trying to paint a picture of inappropriate conduct. But Kendra held firm, grounded in the truth that she'd maintained boundaries even when it hurt, that she'd put professional ethics first even when her heart wanted something else. Finally, they moved to character questions. References from previous employers, testimony from other members of the medical team. Dr. Okafor spoke about Kendra's professionalism and clinical excellence. Dr. Chen confirmed that personal conversations were part of the therapeutic approach. Even Marcus, the nurse who'd rotated shifts with her, testified that Kendra had never exhibited inappropriate behavior. By the time the hearing concluded, Kendra felt wrung out and raw. The ethics committee said they'd review all testimony and documentation and issue a finding within 2 weeks. She left the building on shaky legs, finding Jae-sung waiting exactly where she'd left him. How bad was it? He asked. Bad, but not insurmountable. She let him pull her into a hug, soaking up his solid presence. They tried to make it seem sordid, but the facts support us. We didn't do anything wrong. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I know. But it's done now. We wait. The next 2 weeks were excruciating. Kendra went to work at the clinic, trying to focus on patients who needed her, but part of her mind was always on the pending decision. Her future hanging in the balance, determined by whether a committee believed she'd maintained professional ethics or crossed lines she shouldn't have. Jae-sung was struggling too. The preliminary hearing had delayed trial proceedings, giving defense attorneys more time to build their case against his credibility. He'd received threats, vague but concerning messages suggesting that people weren't happy with his cooperation. Security had been increased, new protocols implemented. They spent their evenings together at his apartment, seeking comfort in each other's presence. They still hadn't taken the physical relationship further than kissing, both of them too stressed and uncertain to navigate that complexity. But the emotional intimacy deepened, became the foundation they built everything else on. What if they find against you? Jae-sung asked one night as they lay on his couch, Kendra's head on his chest. Then I appeal. Fight it. This is my career, my identity. I'm not giving it up without a fight. But what if you lose? What if they revoke your license? Kendra was quiet for a long moment, facing a fear she hadn't wanted to voice. Then I figure out what comes next. Find another way to help people. But I don't lose you. That's non-negotiable. His arms tightened around her. You might regret that choice. I might. But it's mine to make. The decision from the ethics committee arrived on a Tuesday morning. Kendra was at work when her phone rang, an unknown number that made her stomach drop. She stepped outside to take the call, finding a quiet spot in the parking lot. Ms. Williams, this is Jennifer Morrison from the Illinois Board of Nursing Ethics Committee. I'm calling regarding your preliminary hearing. Yes. Kendra's heart pounded so hard she could barely hear. The committee has reviewed all testimony and documentation. We find no evidence of ethical violations during your contracted care period with Mr. Park. The relationship that developed after your contract concluded is outside our jurisdiction. Your nursing license remains in good standing. Relief hit so hard Kendra's knees nearly buckled. Thank you. Thank you so much. However, I want to be clear, this was a close call, Ms. Williams. The circumstances raised legitimate concerns. I'd advise extreme caution about any future situations that might appear to blur professional boundaries. I understand. Thank you. After hanging up, Kendra stood in the parking lot and cried. Not from sadness, but from pure relief. Her career was safe. Her license intact. Everything she'd worked so hard to build remained hers. She called Jae-sung immediately. They cleared me, she said before he could even say hello. No violations. License in good standing. She could hear the relief in his voice, so intense it made him sound choked. Thank God. Kendra, I'm so glad. You deserved that verdict. We both deserved it. We did the right thing, even when it was hard. What happens now? With the trial? I don't know. But at least we face it without worrying about my career. The main trial began 3 weeks later. Kendra wasn't required to testify. The preliminary hearing had settled questions about her professional conduct, but she attended anyway, sitting in the gallery to support Jae-sung. Watching him take the stand was difficult. The defense attorneys were brutal, trying to paint him as unreliable, emotionally compromised, motivated by deals rather than genuine cooperation. But Jae-sung held steady, answered questions clearly and honestly, didn't hide from his past or try to minimize what he'd done. Just laid out the facts and let them speak for themselves. When it was over, when the jury returned guilty verdicts against the defendants and Jae-sung's testimony was cited as crucial evidence, Kendra felt something settle in her chest. Pride. Not just that justice had been served, but that the man she loved had helped serve it, had chosen integrity over self-protection. They celebrated quietly that night, just the two of them in his apartment with wine and takeout Chinese food. The trial's conclusion meant Jae-sung's cooperation agreement was fulfilled. He was truly free now from house arrest, from federal obligations, from everything except the supervised release period and his own determination to build something better. So what's next? Kendra asked as they ate lo mein straight from the containers. I got accepted into a graduate program at Northwestern. Business ethics, if you can believe it. Figure if I'm going to run legitimate businesses, I should understand the ethical frameworks involved. That's perfect for you. And the NGO I started? It's growing. We've partnered with 3 schools in underserved neighborhoods, providing tutoring and mentorship. I'd like to expand it further. Kendra smiled, seeing the genuine enthusiasm in his face. You're building something real. I'm trying. With your help. He set down his food and took her hand. Kendra, I know we've been taking this slow. Being careful. But I need to know, is this what you want? Long term? Because I'm all in. Completely. And if you're not. I'm in, she interrupted. Completely. This is what I want. Even with all the complications? Especially with the complications. They prove we're strong enough to handle hard things. He kissed her then, deeper than before, with an intensity that spoke of months of restraint finally breaking. Kendra responded in kind, her hands sliding into his hair, pulling him closer. They broke apart breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. Stay tonight, Jae-sung said softly. Not for sex necessarily. Just stay. I want to wake up with you here. Okay, I'll stay. They moved to his bedroom, changing into comfortable clothes, settling into bed with the tentative uncertainty of people crossing a new threshold. Kendra curled against his side, his arm around her shoulders, and felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This was what she wanted. Him, them, this life they were building together from broken pieces and honest choices. It wasn't perfect, wasn't safe or simple or without complications. But it was real, and it was theirs, and that was enough. She drifted to sleep feeling more peaceful than she had in months, secure in the knowledge that they'd survived everything thrown at them and come out stronger. What Kendra didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that across the city, in a cramped apartment in Wicker Park, Dr. Liam Willis was sitting at his laptop, scrolling through court documents related to Jae-sung's trials. Liam had moved on after the breakup. Or tried to. Started dating again, focusing on his career, telling himself that Kendra's choice was hers to make. But something kept nagging at him. Something about the timeline didn't add up. He'd gone back through his messages with Kendra, noting when she'd started to pull away. 3 months into her contract with Park Jae-sung. Right around the time she'd begun picking up extra shifts, becoming more distracted, less present in their relationship. Liam had chalked it up to stress. A difficult patient. The high stakes of the contract. But now, seeing the hearing testimony about personal conversations and emotional intimacy, he wondered if something else had been happening. Something that started before Kendra admitted to having feelings. He pulled up the contract terms for the medical team. Specific clauses about professional boundaries. Clear guidelines about prohibited relationships. And there, buried in the documentation, he found something interesting. A notation from Dr. Chen's psychiatric reports, dated 2 months into the contract. Patient reports strong attachment to primary nurse. Recommend monitoring for dependency issues. 2 months. That was a month before Kendra started pulling away from Liam. Which meant feelings had developed early, possibly too early to be explained away as post-contract romance. Liam leaned back in his chair, thinking. He wasn't vindictive. Didn't want to hurt Kendra or destroy what she'd built with Park. But something about this didn't sit right. The timeline suggested a relationship that developed during the contract, despite what they'd testified. And if that was true, Kendra had lied under oath. Had misrepresented the timeline to protect herself and Park. Which would invalidate the ethics committee's decision and potentially cost her everything. He should let it go. Should move on with his life and let Kendra live hers. But the more he looked at the documentation, the more certain he became that something wasn't being told. And Liam had always believed in truth, even when it was complicated. He opened a new document and began typing, organizing his findings. Timeline discrepancies. Psychiatric reports. The notation about Kendra requesting reassignment, but not following through. All the small pieces that painted a different picture from the one presented at the hearing. Liam told himself he was just documenting observations. That he wasn't sure yet what he'd do with this information. But in the back of his mind, he knew. Knew that he couldn't let this go, couldn't just accept a version of events that didn't align with the evidence. Somewhere in the process of that relationship, professional boundaries had blurred. Maybe not physically, but emotionally. And emotional violations could be just as serious as physical ones when it came to professional ethics. He saved the document and closed his laptop, telling himself he needed more time to think about what to do. But the damage was already done. The doubt planted. The investigation beginning. And across the city, Kendra and Jae-sung slept peacefully, unaware that the foundation they'd built was about to be tested in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Dr. Liam Willis stared at his ceiling in the darkness, wrestling with conscience and consequence, and wondered if finding the truth was worth destroying the people it would hurt. The answer, he was beginning to realize, might not matter. Because once you started pulling threads, sometimes the whole tapestry unraveled whether you wanted it to or not. And this particular truth, about timelines and feelings and a relationship that might have started before anyone was willing to admit, was a thread that could unravel everything Kendra and Jae-sung had fought so hard to build. Liam picked up his phone, scrolling to the contact information for an attorney friend who specialized in professional ethics cases. His thumb hovered over the call button for a long moment. Then, finally, he pressed it. "Hey, it's Liam Willis. I need to talk to you about a potential ethics violation. Do you have time this week?" The wheels of investigation began to turn, slowly and inexorably, toward a truth that would change everything. And in his apartment across the city, Jae-sung held Kendra close in sleep, completely unaware that the past was about to reach forward and tear apart the future they'd dared to believe in. If you're ready for part 2, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. And let me know in the comments. What part of this story intrigued you the most? Your thoughts might shape how the next chapter unfolds. See you in part 2.